The great strength of MMO games has always been their ability to throw thousands, sometimes millions of players into new worlds and allow them to explore these worlds simultaneously. Whether conquering strange lands with the aid of brave comrades, or defeating other players in duels and battles, these games provide a vehicle for complex social interactions between players, and as such it should come as no surprise that much like real-life communities, these games can produce their own share of heroes and villains. Whilst arguably not the most social MMO by design, World of Warcraft dominated the scene for well over a decade. Whilst other games in the genre such as Final Fantasy XIV and EVE Online have succeeded in developing their own style of player interactions, World of Warcraft was the undisputed king of the genre for years, amassing at its height a total population of over 12 million active players. But it was in its earliest days, in the period immediately before and after the launch of the vanilla game, that World of Warcraft produced its most enduring legacies. Heroes and villains alike rose to dominate and forge their own destinies alongside that of Azeroth, and in many cases, these players earned renown for their skillful, often innovative approach to their chosen class, at a time when the vast majority of players had little understanding or guidance on how to play their characters. Standing above all other classes in the vanilla game was the Warrior. Representing one of the largest portions of the player base, this class benefited from being the only reliable tank, and it was also one of the most powerful classes in endgame player versus player content too. All of these factors solidified the Warrior as the most prestigious class at the dawn of World of Warcraft. And as one might expect, this glorious age drew many legendary players to the class. Swifty, Pat and Cunyon are just three of the many famous names associated with the Warrior. But to me, there is one name and one player which stands above all others. If those just mentioned were great warriors, then this player was the Warrior. Someone who single-handedly changed the direction of their class and had an impact on its development for years to come. A true legend of the game. My name is Vulgrin, and this is the story of the greatest warrior in World of Warcraft. This is the story of Indal'Amar. It can be hard to look back now, almost 20 years after the initial release of World of Warcraft, and truly understand the environment in which this titanic game was crafted. So much has changed in that time, and the massively multiplayer online game has become much more mainstream than it once was. After all, WoW was itself responsible for a whole wave of releases in the MMO genre, with each game trying to copy Blizzard's formula to find their own success in the new, exciting world of massively multiplayer online gaming. But World of Warcraft wasn't born in a void, and it was far from the first game of its kind. Ultima Online, EverQuest and Asheron's Call, just to name three of the biggest MMOs of the early era, all preceded Blizzard's creation, in some cases by more than 5 years. Many of these early MMOs would inspire the team working on World of Warcraft. Yet despite this early experience, the MMO genre was still in its starry-eyed infancy, and no single game, not even EverQuest, had truly broken into the mainstream gaming scene. Blizzard would hope to change this situation, but to do so they would need to craft a game which was simultaneously less punishing but more engaging than anything that had come before, and this was understandably a challenging goal. Lacking the foundations that future expansions would benefit from, vanilla World of Warcraft was the result of constant testing and innovation, with mechanics and content being continuously re-evaluated and the direction of the game itself often changing to strike the balance between accessibility and fulfillment. Perhaps the most important part of this process was the development of the class system which would form the core of the player experience. Previous MMOs had taken wildly different paths with player progression and identity. Some had clearly defined class roles, whereas others dispensed with the concept of classes entirely. World of Warcraft would take the former approach, but faced with the task of building these classes from the ground up and balancing them against one another, Blizzard understood that robust testing would be essential. And this is where we finally come to the beta phase for World of Warcraft and the role of Indal'Amar. Beta testing in the context of game development has several purposes. Most notably, it allows for a group of users to test software and to report back on any bugs or unintended effects caused by player interactions with the game world. Like any form of product testing, this is an efficient way for developers to obtain feedback and to address pressing issues which could negatively affect the game prior to its release. Often, this feedback may contain suggestions to the developers by beta testers on how they could alter or improve elements of the game, and in the case of World of Warcraft, Blizzard was often receptive to these suggestions. The guild Nerfed is itself a legend in the annals of Azeroth, having been present in World of Warcraft since the very beginning, being involved in its alpha and beta testing phases. A separate video about Nerfed and the many interesting characters and incidents which they were involved in may one day follow, but suffice to say that it was among this legendary group of players that Indalomar first found his home, being the brother of the guild master. Like everyone involved in this pre-release testing phase of WoW, Indalomar was concerned with providing feedback and improvements to the game. His class of choice was the Warrior, the plate-wearing, blood-stained Weapon Master class, which would go on to dominate Vanilla WoW in its early post-release years. But despite how strong the Warrior would become at the dawn of the game, it was even more powerful during testing and was at the centre of a debate as to whether it was overpowered. You see, some players on the Warrior forums during beta testing argued that the damage output for the class was simply far too high. Into this conversation stepped Indalomar. Despite playing a Warrior himself, and therefore doubtless personally invested in the success of the class, he agreed with those that said that the damage output was far too high, and he was able to demonstrate this. The video currently playing in the background was recorded by Indalomar himself, and it is largely this clip that created his legend. But what's actually going on here? Well, quite clearly you can see Indalomar on his Undead Warrior chain-killing high-level mobs in the Blackrock stronghold area of the Burning Steppes, seemingly with ease. Every new enemy he engages immediately drops to around 20% health, making farming an absolute breeze. How is this possible? Indalomar's farming method and ridiculously high damage output here was based on 3 abilities, all tied to the Fury specialization. These were Bloodthirst, Slam, and Flurry. Bloodthirst was different in this early era than what it would become, and it was pretty overpowered. Like the Victory Rush spell that we would come to know, Bloodthirst could only be used after killing an enemy. The ability dealt 150% weapon damage with a 100% critical strike chance, so a guaranteed crit at the start of every fight that followed a kill. This interacted perfectly with the original Flurry talent, which, if maxed out, increased the player's attack speed for the next 3 melee attacks after dealing a critical strike by 35%. So, guaranteed crit from Bloodthirst dealing huge damage, followed up by guaranteed faster attack speed for the subsequent 3 weapon swings. Add to this the original Slam, which had a quick cast time, which could not be interrupted, and you had the final element in this Wrecking Ball spec. If you're wondering what the purpose of Slam was here, it was a great rage dump ability which allowed players to spam attacks with very slow, two-handed, big-hitting weapons at a much faster rate. And remember, this version was uninterruptible, so nothing to get in the way of turning your heavy, massive battle axe into a machine gun. You get the picture. Warrior was extremely fun to play, as we can see from watching the video, but also extremely overpowered. When presented to the forums, Indalomar's recorded massacre quickly settled the debate, and, ironically given that he was a Warrior player, led to a series of nerfs aimed at making those Chads of the battlefield a little less dominant. The video was incredibly impressive at the time, demonstrating both Indalomar's knowledge of his own class as well as his dedication to the improvement of the game as a whole, willing as he was to show off how overpowered Warrior damage was with the aim of improving balance. Players on the forums reacting to the video were so impressed that they granted Indalomar an unofficial title, dubbing him The Warrior due to his skill with the class. To this day, the ease at which Indalomar blasts through the mobs and the cool watch and learn folks quote at the beginning makes this video still a joy to watch nearly 20 years after it was first recorded. And on a personal note, If you're wondering why I'm playing an undead warrior in Season of Discovery, this video is part of the reason. And whilst it would be enough to secure Indelamar's legend on its own, this incident is not nearly where his story in World of Warcraft ended. I began by discussing just how much has changed since the early days in which WoW was developed. This wasn't just because the MMO scene was in its infancy, but also because the culture at Blizzard was so different back then. All successful companies go through a series of similar phases, and early on this includes a period of rapid growth as the company realises initial success from their endeavours, gains access to greater resources as a result, and becomes confident enough to expand. For Blizzard, this meant hiring staff to work on World of Warcraft as it quickly transitioned from an innovative newcomer to the MMO scene to its unquestioned king. It seems strange now, in an era of distrust, and with its reputation so battered, to think that several of these new Blizzard hires came from the games community itself. But this is how it was back then, and Indalamar, or to use his real name, Travis Day, was one of these newly hired staff members. For the next 13 years, Travis would continue to demonstrate the same eye for design and balance that he had shown back in the beta, working on every World of Warcraft expansion up to Legion and eventually leaving the company in 2018. His role was as an itemization developer, and while some of you watching this video may not have heard the name Indalamar before now, you have likely stumbled across references to Travis and his famous character in-game. For example, in the original Naxxramas, lucky players may have obtained a magical ring granting frost resistance and stamina, quite useful in the context of the raid. More interesting than the stats, however, is the text on the item, which reads, quote, "Inscribed on the band, Ramaladni." It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on here, as if you read Ramaladni backwards, you get Indalamar. Not exactly the hardest mystery to solve in World of Warcraft. And this wouldn't be the only reference to Indalamar or Ramaladni, with one other noted example being the epic two-handed axe Ramaladni's Blade of Culling, which dropped from Deathbringer Saurfang in the Icecrown Citadel raid in Wrath of the Lich King. I do wonder if the choice of weapon connected to Indalamar here being a two-handed axe was a way of honouring his original video from all the way back in the beta, in which he used a two-handed axe to such devastating effect. There have been numerous examples in recent years where Blizzard's habit of naming items or characters in their games after prominent employees has backfired on the company. However, this is not one of those examples, and Indalamar rightly deserves his recognition in items, characters, and even a TCG card referencing him and his impact on the development of the game. In closing, I would argue that there are more notable warrior players than any other class in World of Warcraft, in part due to its prominence and prestige at the dawn of the game, which was just such a mythical time overall. As such, there are numerous famous names which one could point to when discussing the question of the greatest warrior, and I accept that my choice of Indalamar is obviously subjective. What makes him stand out for me, however, is that he was there from the very beginning, schooling others in the ways of the warrior, and that he remained working on the game in a professional capacity for well over a decade. Few other players can say that they have gone on to make such a positive impact on the game as a whole, or that they had such a confident understanding of their chosen class before the game was even released. Fewer still can claim to have shaped the class through their insights, helping to create the framework that would allow other legends to succeed. This to me is why Indalamar will always remain the greatest warrior in World of Warcraft in my eyes. This video is dedicated to the memory of Travis Day, the real-life legend behind the character of Indalamar. Travis sadly passed away last year at the age of just 41. On behalf of myself and doubtless the whole World of Warcraft community, I would like to end today by expressing my gratitude for all that he gave to our game, and offer my heartfelt condolences to his family, to whom he must have meant infinitely more. Thank you, Travis. You will always be a legend. If you enjoyed my video and you'd like to see more content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Let me know which players you consider to be legends like Indalamar. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Finally, if you'd like to catch me live playing Classic WoW, and maybe other games too, you can find a link to my Twitch channel in the description and pinned comment below. I've been Thulgrin. Thank you all very much for joining me, my friends. And of course, until next time, bye-bye.